This hearing will come to order. Today, the committee will discuss the interim nuclear agreement which the United States and 5 other nations have reached with Iran last month, and we welcome our Secretary of State, the Honorable John Kerry, to address the questions of the committee members here regarding the administration's plan. And Mr. Secretary, we very much appreciate you coming before the committee today. And while we will debate how best to derail Iran's nuclear weapons program, I know that you and all of us appreciate that it poses a threat to our national security here in the United States. Congress has played a key role in U.S. policy towards Iran, mainly by driving sanctions against the regime. And I'll remind the members of this committee that the legislation which we passed here passed out unanimously. Legislation that the Royce-Engel bill, which passed the House of Representatives last summer, passed by a vote of 400 to 20. So we look forward to a constructive discussion today. These are high-stake issues, but I am confident that the spirit of bipartisanship will prevail, as it typically does on this committee, and we welcome our Secretary of State here today. The key issue is whether a final agreement would allow Iran to manufacture nuclear fuel. Unfortunately, the interim agreement raises some questions about this. My concern is that we may have bargained away our fundamental position, which is enshrined in 6 UN Security Council resolutions. And that fundamental agreement is that Iran should not be enriching and reprocessing. And we may bargain that away for a false confidence that we can effectively block Iran's misuse of these key nuclear bomb-making technologies. Just within the last few days, Iran has announced plans to press on and improve its centrifuge technology in order to enrich uranium. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, we had the comment from the foreign minister of Iran stating that Iran was going to continue construction at the plutonium reactor at Iraq, which will be capable of producing weapons-grade plutonium once it's operational. And we had another comment from those in the regime that they may produce, that they will set up more of these plutonium reactors. That tells us something about Iran's intentions, and that is why we are concerned about how this agreement will be enforced. Yes, we agree, on the concept of verification, that we have to have good verification. One of the things we remember as we deal with this government in Iran is that it is one that aggressively supports terrorism, supports the most radical groups. In 2006, I was in Haifa when it was being shelled, and it was being shelled specifically with Iranian missiles and missiles provided, rockets provided by Syria. This is a regime which, as we were reminded not too long ago, Mr. Ted Deutsch reminded me that when we heard the rally and the slogan, "Death to America," it was not just the Basiji that were marching. It was members of the government as well that were shouting, "Death to America." It is a regime which brutally represses its own people. And oftentimes the way a country treats its own citizens tells you how it might treat others. And it threatens our ally with extinction, saying that Israel is a country which could be destroyed with just one bomb. It is that kind of commentary out of the regime that gives us pause. And it has, and this is the important point to many of us, it has a history of deceiving the international community about its nuclear program. The director of the IAEA raised that concern with me. It has that history, and it's pursuing a ballistic missile program in violation of UN Security Council resolutions as well. So Iran is not just another country. It simply can't be trusted with enrichment technology because verification efforts can never be foolproof with respect to their ability to get undetectable nuclear breakout. That's one of the concerns we have. An agreement in which Iran purchases and returns spent nuclear fuel for energy generation is one thing. That's something that we were willing to get an agreement on. But allowing enrichment, I feel, is too high, going beyond the lines of realistic international control. There's been a lot of talk about whether Iran has the right to enrich technology. This committee has held several hearings on the Non-Proliferation Treaty over the years. It is clear that Iran has no such right under that treaty. And while I've heard the administration say that Iran has no right, it's a moot point if an agreement permits enrichment, giving Iran a de facto right. The proposed sanctions relief is another concern. The sanctions pressure that drove Iran to the negotiating table took years to build. While the interim agreement relief is limited, governments throughout the world will not be easily convinced to reverse course and ratchet up sanctions pressure if Iran is only buying time with this agreement. Moreover, companies have stayed away from Iran as much due to the atmosphere of international isolation as to the letter of U.S. sanctions law. I am concerned that that may now be lost, because foreign-based oil companies have jumped to start discussions with Iran. This is the headline from Wall Street Journal: Iran deal opens door for businesses. We've got to counter that impression. Lastly, a point I want to make is that sanctions have worked elsewhere. International sanctions pressure brought down the immoral apartheid regime in South Africa. That led to South Africa not only releasing Nelson Mandela from prison, but also abandoning its nuclear arsenal, giving up its atomic bomb. A bipartisan coalition from Newt Gingrich to John Kerry supported those tough sanctions, even overriding a presidential veto. Negotiations, quiet diplomacy was tried first. But at the end of the day, there was the intent that if we did not achieve the result, that the overwhelming sanctions would be imposed, and indeed they were, and indeed they worked. We are facing an immoral and very dangerous regime in Iran, one nearing a nuclear weapon. I am hard-pressed to understand why we'd be letting up sanctions pressure at the very time its economy is on the ropes without getting an agreement which stops its centrifuges from spinning. I think all of us expected that the sanctions would be used to get an agreement that stopped the centrifuge program, to stop those from spinning, and that is my basic concern here. I now turn to Ranking Member Engel for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kerry, thank you for appearing before the committee today and for your tireless efforts to enhance the security and prosperity of the United States. Thank you, Chairman Royce, for calling this hearing on an issue that's obviously of paramount importance to American national security. Upon taking office nearly 5 years ago, President Obama inherited an almost non-existent strategy to deal with the looming threat of Iran obtaining a nuclear weapons capability. The President initially focused on the diplomatic track, but the limitations of that one-dimensional approach soon became apparent when Iran walked away from the P5+1 negotiations in October of 2009. After that, the administration shifted to a two-track strategy which coupled engagement with increasing economic pressure through sanctions while making it clear that all options remain on the table. This is the policy I favored, and the President, together with Secretary Clinton, succeeded beyond expectations in uniting the international community against Iran's nuclear ambitions. The UN Security Council and the European Union, acting in parallel with our efforts, imposed tough new sanctions on Iran. This committee took the lead on a bipartisan basis to pass biting sanctions legislation, the Royce-Engel bill, designed to cripple the Iranian economy, giving the administration the tools it needed to change the calculus of the Iranian regime. That was a bill that passed unanimously out of this committee. I was very, very proud of it to work on such a bipartisan basis with Chairman Royce, and then passed the floor, as the Chairman has pointed out, by a vote of 400 to 20. It was, I think, one of the finer days of the United States House of Representatives. Over the last 3 years, President Obama has signed 4 major Iran sanctions bills into law. Taken together with international sanctions, this has made it exceedingly difficult for Iran to sell its oil on the global markets, cut off Tehran from the international financial system, and severely limited Iran's access to hard currency. Several weeks ago, thanks to sustained efforts by Congress and the administration, the Iranians finally admitted that the sanctions are hurting them badly, and for the first time, they started talking about the specifics of a negotiated settlement to curtail their nuclear program. As all of us know, the P5+1 reached an interim agreement with Iran at the end of November. And Secretary Kerry, I want to commend you for your incredible personal efforts to secure this deal. It makes me tired just watching all of your travel back and forth across the Atlantic and around the world. But having said that, I want to make it clear that I have some serious reservations about the agreement. First and foremost, it seems to me at a minimum, it should have required Iran to suspend uranium enrichment as demanded by 6 separate UN Security Council resolutions. I don't think it's asking too much of Iran to say that at least while we're talking, you stop enriching. For the 6-month period while we're talking, Iran, in my estimation, should not, again, going counter to 6 separate UN Security Council resolutions. It makes me wonder how serious they are and how sincere they are in terms of really wanting to negotiate in good faith. Mr. Secretary, you and other administration officials have sought to make the case that the interim agreement will place significant restraints on the Iranian nuclear program and not allow it to advance while we negotiate a long-term settlement to eliminate the threat of an Iranian nuclear weapons capability once and for all. You've also said that the sanctions relief we are providing is very limited and reversible. I hope you're right, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that the interim agreement must be fully implemented and completely verified. I can assure you that Congress will act immediately to ratchet up the pressure at the first sign of cheating or backtracking by Iran. Mr. Secretary, I hope you can confirm for the committee today that the administration will continue to enforce all sanctions that remain in place during the implementation of the interim agreement, and that you will not hesitate to designate additional entities for sanctions over the next 6 months as circumstances warrant. In addition, I hope you will send a clear message to businesses all over the world that now is not the time to make plans to re-enter Iran. And again, the Chairman showed that headline in the Wall Street Journal. In order for me to support a comprehensive agreement, restraints must be put in place to assure us that Iran cannot continue down the path of a nuclear weapon. In that context, Secretary Kerry, I hope you will address the following questions in our discussion today. First, if Iran retains any enrichment capacity, how can we be sure that they will not forever remain on the brink of a breakout capacity? Second, why do many of our closest regional allies feel the interim deal caught them by surprise? And what are you doing to make certain that they are included as negotiations continue on a final deal? 3, allies of the United States that look at Iran as an existential threat to them, Saudi Arabia, Israel, United Arab Emirates, all oppose the deal. They're the ones closest to it. Why is that the case? Why does the administration strongly oppose congressional action on Iran's sanctions legislation that makes clear new sanctions will not be imposed unless Iran violated the terms of the interim deal? So now that we have an interim deal, we must focus with laser-like intensity on ensuring that any long-term agreement dismantles all Iranian nuclear infrastructure that could lead to a breakout capacity. Any deal which does not achieve that goal will be a devastating failure. Mr. Secretary, it's critical that you and the President consult very closely with Congress as you implement the interim agreement and negotiate a final deal. Waivers in existing sanctions legislation will only get you so far, and it's likely that Congress would have to pass legislation to implement any comprehensive deal. But it will be impossible to take that step unless members of this committee and the full House are fully informed and absolutely convinced that Iran has agreed to verifiably abandon its efforts to develop a nuclear weapons capability. And finally, Mr. Secretary, as you continue to engage with the Iranians, and I know you know this, but I really need to mention it, I would urge you to remain cognizant of the fact that Iran remains the top state sponsor of terrorism in the world, continues to support Hezbollah and the brutal Assad regime in Syria, continues to engage in systematic violations of human rights, continues its efforts to destabilize a number of Persian Gulf states, and continues to imprison innocent Americans, all of this under the so-called moderate Rouhani government. So again, Mr. Secretary, thank you for appearing today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Members of the House, this afternoon we're pleased to be joined by John Kerry, our country's 68th Secretary of State. Prior to his appointment, Secretary Kerry served as a United States Senator from Massachusetts for 28 years, chairing the Senate Foreign Relations Committee during the last 4 years of his tenure. The Secretary was in the Middle East just last week. He'll be returning there tomorrow before heading to Southeast Asia to, among other things, assess relief efforts in the Philippines. It's a demanding schedule. Without objection, Mr. Secretary, your prepared statement will be made part of the record. The committee members here will have 5 days to submit statements and questions for the record. And, Mr. Secretary, we would like to again welcome you before this committee today. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very, very much. Ranking Member Engel, members of the committee, thanks very much for welcoming me back, and I am happy to be back here. There's no more important issue in American foreign policy than the question of the one we're focused on here today. And obviously, from the Chairman's introduction, you know that I come here with an enormous amount of respect for your prerogatives on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, as we did in the Senate. And it's entirely appropriate that we're here to satisfy your questions, hopefully allay your concerns and fears, because I believe the agreement that we have ought to do that. And I think the path that we're on should do that. And as I describe it to you, I hope you'll leave here today with a sense of confidence that we know what we're doing, our eyes are open, we have no illusions. It's a tough road. I don't come here with any guarantees whatsoever, and I think none of what we've done in this agreement begs that notion. In other words, everything is either verifiable or clear, and there are a set of requirements ahead of us which will even grow more so in the course of a comprehensive agreement. And we can talk about that, I'm sure we will, in the course of the day. Let me just begin by saying that President Obama and I have both been very clear, as every member of this committee has been, that Iran must not acquire a nuclear weapon, and it is the President's centerpiece of his foreign policy. Iran will not acquire a nuclear weapon. This imperative is at the top of our national security agenda, and I know it's at the top of yours as well. So I really do welcome the opportunity to have a discussion not only about what the first step agreement does, but also to clarify, I hope significantly, what it doesn't do, because there's a certain, as there is in any of these kinds of things, a certain mythology that sometimes grows up around them. The title of today's hearing is the Iran nuclear deal. Does it further U.S. national security? And I would state to you unequivocally, the answer is yes. The national security of the United States is stronger under this first step agreement than it was before. Israel's national security is stronger than it was the day before we entered into this agreement, and the Gulf and Middle East interests are more secure than they were the day before we entered this agreement. Now, here's how. Put simply, once implemented, and it will be in the next weeks, this agreement halts the progress of Iran's nuclear program, halts the progress, and rolls it back in certain places for the first time in nearly 10 years. It provides unprecedented monitoring and inspections while we negotiate to see if we can conclude a comprehensive agreement, if we can conclude. And I came away from our preliminary negotiations with serious questions about whether or not they're ready and willing to make some of the choices that have to be made. But that's what we put to test over the next months. While we negotiate to see if we can conclude a comprehensive agreement that addresses all of our concerns, there's an important fact. Iran's nuclear program will not move forward. Under this agreement, Iran will have to neutralize, end, its entire stockpile of 20% enriched uranium, which you all know is a short step away from weapons-grade uranium. So if you remember when Prime Minister Netanyahu held up that cartoon at the UN with the bomb in it, in 2012, he showed the world a chart that highlighted the type of uranium that he was most concerned about. And he was talking about that 20% stockpile. Under this agreement, Iran will forfeit all, not part, all of that 20%, that 200-kilogram stockpile, gone. Under this agreement, Iran will also halt the enrichment above 5%, and it will not be permitted to grow its stockpile of 3.5% enriched uranium. Iran cannot increase the number of centrifuges in operation, and it will not install or use any next-generation centrifuges to enrich uranium. Under this agreement, we will have increased transparency of Iran's nuclear program, giving us a window into their activities that we don't have today. We will have access to Fordow, a secret facility in a mountaintop that we've never been in. We will now get into it, not once or twice, every single day. We will get into Natanz and have the ability to know, not once or twice, but every single day, what is happening in Natanz. And we will have access each month to the Arak facility, where we will have an extraordinary ability to be able to know through inspections whether or not they are complying with their requirements. Now, this monitoring is going to increase our visibility into Iran's nuclear program, as well as our ability to react should Iran renege on this agreement. And taken together, these first steps will help prevent Iran from using the cover of negotiations to continue advancing its nuclear program in secret, a concern that everybody on this dais shares. Now, in addition, and this is very important, one of our greatest concerns has been the Arak, A-R-A-K, nuclear reactor facility. And this is a heavy water, plutonium-capable reactor. That's unacceptable to us. In the first step, we have now succeeded in preventing them from doing any additional fuel testing, from transferring any fuel rods into the reactor, and from installing any of the uninstalled components which are critical to their ability to be able to advance that particular reactor. So it's frozen, stone cold where it is in terms of its nuclear threat and capacity. Iran will not be able to commission the Iraq reactor during the course of this interim first step agreement. Now, that's very important. Now, we have strong feelings about what will happen in a final comprehensive agreement. From our point of view, Iraq is unacceptable. You can't have a heavy water reactor. But we've taken the first step in the context of a first step. And they will have to halt production of fuel for this reactor and not transfer any fuel or heavy water to the reactor site. It cannot conduct any additional fuel testing for this. And Iran is required to give us design information for the site. We're actually going to have the plans for the site delivered to us. We've long sought this information, and it will provide critical insight into the reactor that has not been previously available to us through intel or any other sources. Now, those are the highlights of what we get in this agreement. And I know many of you have asked, well, what does Iran get in return? And I've seen outlandish numbers out there in some articles talking about 30, 40, 50 billion dollars and so forth, or a disintegration of the sanctions. My friends, that's just not true. It's absolutely not true. We have red-teamed and vetted and cross-examined and run through all the possible numbers through the intel community, through the Treasury Department, through the people in charge of sanctions, and our estimates are that at the end of the 6 months, if they fully comply, if this holds, they would have somewhere in the vicinity of $7 billion total. And this is something that I think you ought to take great pride in. I was here as chairman when we put this in place. I voted for these sanctions, like we all did in the United States Senate. I think we were 100-0, as a matter of fact. And we put them in place for a purpose. The purpose was to get to this negotiation. The purpose was to see whether or not diplomacy and avoidance of war could actually deliver the same thing or better than you might be able to get through confrontation. Now, sanctions relief is limited to the very few targeted areas that are specified in this agreement for a total of about the $7 billion that I've described. And we will continue to vigorously, Ranking Member Engel, we will absolutely, not only will we, I mean, this is going to actually result in a greater intensity of focus on the sanctions, because I've sent a message to every single facility of the United States anywhere in the world that every agency is to be on alert to see any least movement by anybody towards an effort to try to circumvent or undo the sanctions. We don't believe that will happen. And one of the reasons it won't happen is we have a united P5+1. Russia, China, the United States, France, Germany, and Great Britain are all united in this assurance that we will not undo the sanctions and that we will stay focused on their enforcement. Now, all the sanctions on Iran, further, on its abysmal human rights record, over its support for terrorism, which you've mentioned, and over its destabilizing activities in places like Syria, those sanctions will all remain in effect. They have nothing to do with the nuclear. They're there for the reasons they're there. And we're not taking them off. This agreement does provide Iran with a very limited, temporary, and reversible relief. And it's reversible at any time in the process that there is noncompliance. If Iran fails to meet its commitments, we can and will revoke this relief. And we will be the first ones to come to you if this fails, to ask you for additional sanctions. The total amount of relief is somewhere between the 6 and 7 billion that I described. That is less than 1% of Iran's $1 trillion economy. And it is a small fraction of the $100 billion plus of oil revenue alone that we have deprived Iran of since 2012. I want you to keep in mind, this really pales in comparison to the amount of pressure that we are leaving in place. Iran will lose $30 billion over the course of this continued sanctions regime over the next 6 months. So compare that. They may get $7 billion of relief, but they're going to lose $30 billion. It's going to go into the frozen accounts. It will be added to the already $45 billion or so that's in those accounts now that they can't access. And during the 6-month negotiating period, Iran's crude oil sales cannot increase. Oil sanctions continue as they are today. There's no diminishment of the oil and banking sanctions that you put in place. We have not lifted them. We haven't eased them. That means that as we negotiate, oil sanctions will continue to cost Iran about the $30 billion I just described, and Iran will actually lose more money each month that we negotiate than it will gain in relief as a result of this agreement. And while we provide $4.2 billion in relief over the 6 months, which is direct money we will release from the frozen account, we are structuring this relief in a way that it is tied to concrete IAEA verified steps that they've agreed to take on the nuclear program. That means that the funds will be transferred not all at once, but in installments in order to ensure that Iran fulfills its commitments. And it means that Iran will not get the full measure of relief until the end of the negotiating period, when and if we verify, certify that they have complied. So now we have committed, along with our P5+1 partners, to not impose any new nuclear-related sanctions for the period of the 6 months. Now, I'm sure there are questions about this. I know I've seen, and there are some in Congress who've suggested they ought to do it. I'm happy to answer them. I will tell you that in my 29 years, just about shy of the full 29, I've served in the Senate. I was always a leading proponent of the sanctions against Iran. I'm proud of what we did here. But it was undeniable that the pressure we put on Iran through these sanctions is exactly what has brought Iran to the table today. And I think Congress deserves an enormous amount of credit for that. But I don't think that any of us thought we were just imposing these sanctions for the sake of imposing them. We did it because we knew that it would hopefully help Iran dismantle its nuclear program. And that was the whole point of the regime. Now, has Iran changed its nuclear calculus? I honestly don't think we can say for sure yet. And we certainly don't just take words at face value. Believe me, this is not about trust. And given the history, and Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the question of deception, given the history, we are all rightly skeptical about whether or not people are ready to make the hard choices necessary to live up to this. But we now have the best chance we've ever had to rigorously test this proposition without losing anything. At least twice in this agreement, it is mentioned that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And that is specific as to the final agreement. In addition, where it does talk about the potential of enrichment in the future, it says mutually agreed upon, at least 4 times, 3 or 4 times in that paragraph. Has to be agreed. We don't agree, it doesn't happen. Now, every one of us remembers Ronald Reagan's maxim when he was negotiating with the Soviet Union: trust but verify. Well, we have a new one: test but verify. Test but verify. And that is exactly what we intend to do in the course of this process. Now, we've all been through tough decisions. Those of you in the top dais have been around here a long time. And you've seen, we all know the kinds of tough, decisions we have to make. But we're asking you to give our negotiators and our experts the time and the space to do their jobs. And that includes asking you, while we negotiate, that you hold off imposing new sanctions. Now, I'm not saying never. I just told you a few minutes ago, if this doesn't work, we're coming back and asking you for more. I'm just saying not right now. Let me be very clear. This is a very delicate diplomatic moment. And we have a chance to address peacefully one of the most pressing national security concerns that the world faces today, with gigantic implications of the potential of conflict. We're at a crossroads. We're at one of those really hinge points in history. One path could lead to an enduring resolution in international community's concerns about Iran's nuclear program. The other path could lead to continued hostility and potentially to conflict. And I don't have to tell you that these are high stakes. We have an obligation to give these negotiations an opportunity to succeed. And we can't ask the rest of the P5+1 and our partners around the world to hold up their ends of the bargain if the United States isn't going to uphold its end of the bargain. If we appear to be going off on our own tangent and do whatever we want, we will potentially lose their support for the sanctions themselves. Because we don't just enforce them by ourselves. We need their help. And I don't want to threaten the unity that we currently have with respect to this approach, particularly when it doesn't cost us a thing to go through this process, knowing that we could put sanctions in place additionally in a week, and we would be there with you seeking to do it. I don't want to give the Iranians a public excuse to flout the agreement. It could lead our international partners to think that we're not an honest broker, and that we didn't mean it when we said that sanctions were not an end in and of themselves, but a tool to pressure the Iranians into a diplomatic solution. Well, we're in that. And 6 months will fly by so fast, my friends, that before you know it, we're either going to know which end of this we're at or not. It's possible also that it could even end up decreasing the pressure on Iran by leading to the fraying of the sanctions regime. I will tell you that there were several P5+1 partners at the table ready to accept an agreement significantly less than what we fought for and got in the end. Mr. Chairman, you want me to wrap?
If you could, Mr. Secretary.
Okay. Let me just say to you that the Iranians know that this threat is on the table. I do want to say one quick word about Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I speak to the Prime Minister usually a couple times a week or several times. Talked to him yesterday morning, and I'm leaving tomorrow, and I'll be seeing him Thursday night. We are totally agreed that we need to focus on this final comprehensive agreement. And Yossi Cohen, the National Security Advisor of the Prime Minister, is here in Washington this week working with our experts, and we will work hand in hand closely, not just with Israel, but with our friends in the Gulf and others around the world, to understand everybody's assessment of what constitutes the best comprehensive agreement that absolutely guarantees that the program, whatever it is to be, is peaceful. And that we have expanded by an enormous amount the breakout time. This first step agreement, Mr. Chairman, actually does expand the breakout time because of the destruction of the 20%, because of the lack of capacity to move forward on all those other facilities. We are expanding the amount of time that it would take them to break out. And clearly, in a final agreement, we intend to make this fail-safe, that we can guarantee that they will not have access to nuclear weapons. So I just simply put the rest of my testimony in the record, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I think we all agree with you. The purpose of the sanctions imposed on Iran was to get Iran to the negotiating table. But I think it's also important to remember the perspective that we had about what we would get in those agreements at the negotiating table. If you recall, the early suggestion was that Iran could basically keep the right to import nuclear fuel, But that would then allow the dismantling of their nuclear weapons capability. And here's the problem, Mr. Secretary. As I said in my statement, we've heard the administration say that Iran has no right to enrich, but the Iranians this week say they do. And the Joint Action Plan indicates that the U.S. would accept an Iranian enrichment program. Iran, from our standpoint, does not need this technology to generate electricity. Clearly, we're prepared to allow them to import nuclear fuel, but if they have this technology, it is exactly what they do need to make a nuclear weapon. So am I reading this right? Is the administration's position that while it may not recognize Iran's right to enrich, Iran will in practice retain an enrichment program as part of the final agreement? That is the question.
It depends, Mr. Chairman, on the final agreement. It is not locked in, no. If you go to the agreement, I'll read you from the agreement, the last paragraph says that it would involve a mutually defined enrichment program with mutually agreed parameters consistent with practical needs. That's a very important concept. It has to relate to whatever it is practically that they might have a reason for arguing they need it for, like medical research or whatever it is, but that would be very limited. It then says with agreed limits on scope and level of enrichment activities and capacity, and where it's carried out, and stocks of enriched uranium for a period to be agreed upon. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 mutually agreed or agreed upons. Now, those are going to have to be agreed upon, and if they can't be, no, they won't have one. If it's so limited and so verifiable and so transparent and so accountable, and you have all of the attributes of cradle-to-grave documentation. One of the things I didn't mention to you, we got in the first step, is access to their mining facilities, so we can trace how much they're mining. We have access to their milling, so we can trace the transition. We have access to the centrifuge workshops. We have access to the centrifuge storage facilities. So we're building the capacity here to know exactly what is happening in an unprecedented fashion. And I will say, as I said to Foreign Minister Zarif in our negotiations, there is no right to enrich in the NPT, but neither is it denied. The NPT is silent on the issue.
Well, it is, of course, the most important concession that they wanted.
Well,
and from our standpoint, as you know, the goal was, as I explained, you're right. If they can enrich to 20%, they're 80% there in terms of a bomb. But if they can enrich to 5%, because of the way technology works, once you master it, if you can enrich to 5%, you're still 70% of the way there towards getting a bomb. So the question going forward that we have is focused on precisely how we dismantle their nuclear weapons program, and that's why we really appreciate this dialogue with you today. There was an additional discussion that I wanted to have on this quote-unquote managed access. I talked to the director of the IAEA, and the inspectors on the International Atomic Energy Agency will have certain abilities, managed access, as we say, with respect to the locations in which the centrifuges, as you said, are assembled, or where they're produced. But does this include access to the military base in Parchin, the military base where the IAEA alleged to me that testing for weapons designs takes place? And I would just ask you also about another point which they have made, which is that Iran is out of compliance with respect to their ICBM program, their 3-stage ICBMs that they're developing. And so what type of access at the end of the day are the IAEA really going to possess here?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me answer a couple of things there if I can, because it's very important to this process. In any negotiation, and you all know this because you negotiate around here every day, you can have a wish list and you approach it from a UN Security Council resolution point of view and say, well, this is where we'd like to be, but then there's the question of where you can really be. Now, without what we've achieved here, Iran would be progressing towards its nuclear weapon now. The window would be narrowing in terms of its breakout time. Israel would be more at risk if we weren't where we are today. That's where we were heading. And from Iran's point of view, as they look at it, they say to themselves, well, wait a minute now. There are about 17 countries in the world that have nuclear programs that are peaceful, and about 4 or 5 of them enrich. And why can't we? Well, obviously, the answer from all of us is because you're out of sync with the IAEA standards, with the NPT, and et cetera. But if they came into compliance, what is it that says that they then couldn't be able to do it? That's their question to us. Now, they say to us, okay, you guys say we ought to completely end enrichment, and yet you're not willing to give us sanctions relief. To them, the balance in the negotiation is, if we give up the very thing we're fighting to be able to do, then you ought to give up the thing that you're using to get us to do it. So their equivalency was, we stop enrichment, you stop sanctions altogether. Now, there isn't anybody here who would have stopped sanctions altogether at that point, because we have to build a process. So what we did was we got, I thought, a remarkable amount. We stopped their program, and we have eliminated the 20% and rolled back their breakout time, enlarged it, while we move towards the final negotiation. Now, the final negotiation is going to be in conjunction with all of our partners. And whatever we do, it's got to make Israel safer. It's got to make the world safer. It can't threaten the Emirates. It can't threaten Saudi Arabia. It can't threaten the region. We all understand this. It has to be a peaceful program. We have to know this to a certainty. And it isn't hard to prove a program is peaceful if it really is. So we're now in the main game. And what we're saying to you is respectfully that you should give us an opportunity, working with you, we'll brief you, we'll be keeping everybody informed, we're working with our friends to make sure we're all on the same page as we go through this process of proof. Now, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. There are dimensions of the ballistic missiles that are of great concern, and we're well aware of that. And there's the Parchin military development facility that's of great concern. The fact is that we believe this agreement also opens the door for our ability to deal with some of that. And the language specifically is, the plan says that Iran will work with the IAEA to facilitate resolution of past and present issues of concern. Past and present issues of concern is formula language for the IAEA and Iran in addressing possible military dimensions, including Parchin. It also says that in the final step, they have to have a resolution of our concerns, which is understood to include the military dimensions of the program, which are on the table. In addition, the plan says there'll be some interim steps, additional steps in between the initial measure and the final step, including addressing the UN Security Council resolutions with a view toward bringing to a satisfactory conclusion the UN Security Council's consideration of this matter. The UN Security Council, you'll remember, Mr. Chairman, sought suspension, not prohibition. And in effect, we now believe that in this plan that we've laid out, Iran is required to address the UN Security Council resolutions regarding its nuclear program before a comprehensive agreement can be reached. And the UN Security Council Resolution 1929, which is contained in that, specifically addresses ballistic missiles. So the answer is, it's on the table, it's part of the discussion.
Well, my time has expired. I want to thank you. As you know, I'm very concerned about this Iranian regime being allowed enrichment capability at the end of the day. I don't think, since neighboring countries don't have it, I think it's a problem that might set off something of an arms race among its neighbors. But I want to go now to Mr. Elliot Engel of New York for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to just follow up on the enriching. And I said this in my opening remarks, Mr. Secretary. I understand that you said that if we force them to stop enriching, they'd want us to remove the sanctions right away. I want to talk about both of those. First the enriching. I just think if there are 6 Security Council resolutions calling on Iran to stop enriching, the least they could do is stop enriching while we're negotiating with them. And I don't really think that that is too much to ask. And that's one of the things that bothers me greatly. Secondly, you mentioned Israel. We have all heard from the government of Israel, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. They all regard Iran as an existential threat to them, all 3 governments, and they don't like the deal. So why are the countries that seem to be most affected by it, that are closest in geography to Iran, that feel an existential threat, why don't they like the deal?
Well, actually, the Emirates put out a statement of support for it. I've been to the Emirates recently, and they believe that cautiously they're concerned, but I think they are completely understanding where we're heading with this and supportive of it. I stood up with the foreign minister of the Emirates in Abu Dhabi, and he said, I support the agreement and what they are trying to do. I was in Saudi Arabia shortly thereafter. I met with Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal. I met with the king and explained to them where we are, and they've issued a statement supportive of the direction we're going in. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel obviously had a difference tactically. The Prime Minister thought we should ratchet up the sanctions and keep the pressure on, and somehow they would collapse. We didn't read it the same way. We also felt that by just trying to go into the negotiation for the final status comprehensive agreement, you would be allowing them to continue to grow their program while you were negotiating. And that's more like the North Korea model. You know, you sort of get into this long, prolonged negotiation, but they're progressing while you're doing it. We wanted to make sure we could try to stop the program where it is and have an assurance then while we negotiate that it can't progress. We also thought it was important to show the world whether or not, in a first step, they were willing to show good faith in moving forward. They have done so. They are stopping. They're doing this. Now, they haven't done it yet. We have to implement. Our negotiators are right now in Vienna and The Hague working on this, and we hope in the next days that'll happen. And we have plans to resume the negotiations in short order thereafter.
Thank you. Let's talk about sanctions. You agree with us that it was sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table. I believe that we need to keep the sanctions pressure on Iran and that the pressure track will actually strengthen your hand. We've been told by the administration and also in your testimony here today that if Congress passes sanctions now, even if those sanctions don't go into effect for 6 months, or would only go into effect if there was a strong breach by Iran, that we would cause irreversible damage to our diplomatic process with Iran. If that's true, then, how can the United States send a message to Iran that there will be dire consequences if the interim deal does not come to fruition? And secondly, why hasn't the administration issued any sanctions designations which involve sanctions that are already in place since the election of Rouhani?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can assure you the Iranians are listening to this hearing today. And I can assure you they've listened to us in every conversation that we've had and in every conversation that our friends have had with them. They know we're serious. They know the President is serious. They know we're serious about diplomacy because we prefer to resolve this through diplomacy and to reach a reasonable accord and to test whether or not President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif and the Supreme Leader want to try to move in a different direction. If they do, you should welcome that. We would welcome that. But we're not naive. We're not sitting here believing that because somebody says it to you, it's true. You've got to work through this process. You have to build trust. You know, when Nixon opened China and Kissinger went over and sat with Mao Zedong, it wasn't based on trust. They set up a process and they began to build a different relationship. Same thing with Gorbachev and Reagan and the Soviet Union. It wasn't based on trust. It was based on a process that was put in place. So we're approaching this, I think, realistically, with an understanding that these sanctions make a difference. Now, they know that if this fails, sanctions will be increased. We've said it 100 times, and you all have said it 100 times, and they know you're yearning to go do it. But you don't need to do it. It is actually gratuitous in the context of this situation, because you can do it in a week if you need to. When we say, this ain't working, we need your help. And believe me, we'll be prepared to do that. And you'll be partners in this as we go along, because we'll be sharing, a sense of where we are and what's going on. So I would simply say to you, we also have partners in this, Congressman. You know that. I mean, if our partners in Europe and China and Russia see us go off and we're hammering in a way that, runs contra to the agreements we've made, it really is very difficult for us to hold the thing whole. And I just think it's not the wisest approach.
Well, I think it could potentially strengthen your hand with a good cop, bad cop scenario. But anyway.
Well, I appreciate your thinking that. I'm respectfully suggesting to you that we think our hand is very, very strong, and nothing is undone in the sanctions regime. They're going to lose $30 billion over the course of the next day. They normally sell 2.5 million barrels per day of oil. They're down to 1 million. Their economy is careening. And they know what they need to do. And their people's hopes and aspirations have been raised. You saw what happened. They came back and people were excited and anticipating the possibility they might have different lives. Those aspirations can't suddenly be put back in a can. So I think there's a lot that is moving in the right direction here, and I think we just ought to try to respect the process. If you couldn't put them in place in a week, if it was impossible to design them, we'll work with you. You can design them. We can sit here and be ready to go. We're just saying to you, please give us the opportunity to negotiate along the contours of what we have agreed upon.
What about the sanctions designations that are already in place?
They stay in place.
But there haven't been any sanctions designations issued since Rouhani's election.
With respect to what?
With respect to the sanctions that are in place, if there have been any violations.
Well, I'm not sure there have been. I'm not aware of one that begged us to put an additional sanction in place.
Okay. And I know my time is up, Mr. Chairman, but let me just ask one final question. You mentioned, Mr. Secretary, that $6 to $7 or $7 to $8 billion in sanctions relief is being provided to Iran as a result, that it's minimal. The rial, we're told, is up about 30% since the signing of this interim agreement. Has that been taken into account when we look at the amount of pressure that we are removing from Iran?
Yes, it has been, and we also take into account, obviously, the variations in the price of oil, sometimes the production. In some times, they've had 800,000 barrels on a month. Sometimes they have more. It's around 1 million. There are variations. We've taken the entire curve of variations into effect. By the way, the day after this agreement was made, the stock market in Israel was the highest it's been.
We're going to go now to Eliana Ross-Layton in Florida.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you stated on 60 Minutes that on a nuclear deal with Iran, a bad deal is worse than no deal. Well, this deal is a bad deal. I believe that the concessions offered to Iran will be the death knell on the sanctions program as we know it. This threatens our allies. It threatens our closest ally, the Democratic Jewish State of Israel. Isn't it true that the fissile material is just one aspect, but there's also the weaponization to consider and also ballistic missiles? This Iran deal does not address these, and Iran has announced a significant advancement on its ballistic missile program. Why was it decided to leave these aspects of Iran's nuclear weapons program unaddressed in the agreement? I oppose the administration's acceptance of Iran's illegitimate claim to a right to enrich uranium. Iran says that this deal does give it that right. I expect the Iranian regime to welcome in the entire international community to show that it has not violated terms of the deal, and both the administration and the media will be effusive in their praise of Iran's fulfillment of the deal. Well, we set the bar so low that Iran will probably comply, and we must not be fooled by that approach. As Iran can start up the centrifuges, it'll be too late to stop them. How long would it take for Iran to enrich uranium from 3.5 to 90% with its current nuclear infrastructure with the advanced centrifuges? I've worked, as you know, over the years to help create the Iran sanctions program that we have in place now. I was the author of several Iran sanctions bills that have become law, including the toughest set of sanctions currently on the books. And it's discouraging that many countries are now eager to do business with Iran, to get Iranian gas, and we will not be able to stop this cash infusion and get sanctions back to their current levels. Now, Jay Carney suggested that if pursuing a diplomatic resolution in Iran is disallowed or ruled out, then we'd be faced with no other option than war to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. This is a false binary choice. It's not one or the other. We've been increasing sanctions on the Iranian regime for a decade. Do you agree with this characterization, and do you believe that those of us in Congress who oppose this deal and seek an increase in sanctions to force Iran to give up its enrichment program? It's not to force Iran to negotiate. It's to force Iran to give up its enrichment program, that we are warmongers. And lastly, two issues. Regarding Camp Ashraf, are the Ashraf 7 being held in Iran or are they in Iraq? And, Mr. Secretary, sometimes a handshake is just a handshake. But when the leader of the free world shakes the bloody hand of a ruthless dictator like Raul Castro, it becomes a propaganda coup for the tyrant. Raul Castro uses that hand to sign the orders to repress and jail democracy advocates. In fact, right now, as we speak, Cuban opposition leaders are being detained and they're being beaten while trying to commemorate today, which is International Human Rights Day. They will feel disheartened when they see these photos. Could you please tell the Cuban people living under that repressive regime that a handshake notwithstanding, the U.S. policy toward the cruel and sadistic Cuban dictatorship has not weakened? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Let me begin, first of all, by making it clear my staff gave me slipped me a piece of paper that informs me that on September 6th, the Treasury Department, I see Congressman Engel's not here, but the Treasury Department identified a network of 6 individuals and 4 businesses subject to the Iran Sanctions Act, and they did sanction them. So Treasury has done at least one instance of the sanctioning since then. With respect to your opening comment, Madam Chairwoman, regarding the death knell of the sanctions, we just have to respectfully disagree, and in 6 months, the world will know whether you're right or I'm right, or whether you're wrong or I'm wrong. And we're going to know. I don't agree with you. I do not believe it is the death knell of the sanctions, because all of our partners are united, and we have enormous tools at our disposal. We are the ones who control access to the financial system of the United States, which is, sine qua non for almost any financial transaction in the world. We have huge ability to leverage and to have an impact on people. And as I said to you earlier, we are going to be all over this. So I have great confidence in our ability to go forward. Moreover, most companies know that the sanctions are still in place and that we're going to be doing this. The visibility that has been given creates great uncertainty for them. Very few companies are going to go out and try and actually cut a contract with Iran if they think in 5 months or 4 months that contract is going to be null and void because the sanctions are going to be ratcheted up, or you might be at war. It's just not going to happen. Common sense tells you that. They want more certainty before they sign any long-term contracts. And those are long-term contracts, oil contracts and such.
If you could answer the Ashraf and the Cuba question.
Beg your pardon?
If you could answer the Ashraf
Sure.
and the
Well,
Cuba
the question on Ashraf was where are they?
Iran or Iraq?
Well, they're in Iraq.
They're in Iraq.
The people.
The 7 hostages that taken
Oh.
from Camp Ashraf.
We
have not known where they are.
I can talk to you about that in classified session.
And on the issue of Cuba and the U.S. policy.
On the issue of Cuba, ladies and gentlemen, today is about honoring Nelson Mandela. And the President's at an international funeral with leaders from all over the world. He didn't choose who's there. They're there to honor Mandela. And we appreciate that people from all over the world and from all different beliefs and walks of life who appreciated Nelson Mandela and or were friends of his came to honor him. And I think, as the President said, I urge you to go read his speech, or if you didn't see it or haven't read it, because the President said in his speech today, honoring Nelson Mandela, he said, we urge leaders to honor Mandela's struggle for freedom by upholding the basic human rights of their
And would
people.
you say Raul Castro is upholding the basic human rights?
No, absolutely not. And
Thank you, sir.
you know my position on that.
We go now to Mr. Brad Sherman of California.
Secretary, I'd like to thank you and others in the administration for your hard work and for actually enforcing the sanctions laws that we in Congress pass. We've got a number of Iran sanctions statutes on the book. Some have waivers, some don't. With regard to those that don't have waivers, can you pledge now that this administration will enforce the laws on the books to the best of your ability?
Absolutely, I think we do.
Yeah. So.
I am concerned because as the
Are you
ranking...
talking about the waiver on the oil?
I was just talking about all of the sanction laws. Some have waivers, some don't. I'm concerned, as the ranking member points out, prior to the first 6 months of this year, we had dozens and dozens of individual companies sanctioned because we discovered the information that indicated that they had violated U.S. sanctions laws. Since Rouhani was elected in the middle of this year, 1, and you've identified it. So we've gone from dozens and dozens to 1. I'm hoping that we're not slow-walking things because we're so happy with Rouhani. I want to thank the administration for recognizing the importance of the sanctions bills that Congress has passed. But the sanctions that the administration lauds now, you opposed, or the administration opposed, you weren't there at the time, every single one of them did. Most significantly, the banking sanctions.
That's the virtue by having voted for them.
Yes, but it is the administration, not just any one cabinet officer, that makes policy. And Secretary Geithner, speaking for the administration at the time, said that he strongly opposed those banking sanctions and that they might actually benefit the regime. And in fact, all the administrations have opposed all these sanctions. They're the reason we didn't pass any sanctions 2001 to 2008. The administration's the reason we didn't pass any in 2009 or 2013. And now you're here saying, don't do anything now because we'll be with you and urging sanctions if this deal doesn't go forward. My fear is we won't be able to act in a week because the only way we can act in a week is if the administration is with us. And every administration has been opposed to every sanction since before I got here. Now, as to the importance of the sanctions relief that we've granted, when international companies know no sanctions in 2013, no sanctions in 2014, that's enough of a window for them to exploit the loopholes in the existing laws. Since the Geneva deal, instead of the Iranian economy careening, it's rebounding, a 30% increase in the value of the rial. Chinese oil companies, Turkish government, Japanese banks all saying now's the time to do business with Iran. And the YPO group, which is members in all of our districts, announces an international business conference in Tehran. I was briefed by the administration on this deal, and I was impressed a little bit less after I read it. Because, Mr. Secretary, you say it halts and rolls back the program. The fact is they've got 9,000 centrifuges turning now, and they'll spin throughout the term of this agreement. So the centrifuges are literally rolling forward. You've told us that they can't increase their stockpile of enriched uranium. Yes, they can. They just have to convert it to uranium oxide. Well, that doesn't neutralize it creates a new stockpile of enriched uranium oxide, which can be turned into uranium hexafluorine in just a couple of weeks. And the Wisconsin Project on Nuclear Arms Control calculates that they will, during the term of this agreement, which is really 7 months, create enough enriched uranium for 4 nuclear bombs. Now, the one issue before Congress is whether we should adopt sanctions that go into effect in this summer, or instead that it's safe to wait. As you point out, we can pass sanctions in a week if you're lobbying for them. But if you're, as every administration has, trying to prevent them, you're asking us to be asleep and do nothing while 9,000 centrifuges turn and a new uranium stockpile is created. And as a practical matter, this agreement doesn't start, the 6 months doesn't start for many weeks. 6 months after that is late July, and anyone who's looked at the congressional calendar knows we will not be able to pass a controversial bill opposed by the administration if we don't start unless we take action well before July. Are we in session in August? September or October? Yeah, a couple of weeks. It appears my time is about to expire. But
Hope you enjoyed my answer.
if you, the one thing I'd like you to focus on is, why are you convinced that the 16,000 kilos of uranium oxide that Iran will create during this agreement is not a threat?
Well,
and do you disagree that it can be converted to gas very easily?
It can be if you have a conversion capacity, and Iran doesn't have a conversion capacity, and they're not allowed to build one.
So it'll take a couple more weeks.
Well, no. Congressman, you're really setting up a straw man, and it's really not a hard one to knock down because there's just no reality to the scenario you're drawing. First of all, I was chair of the hearings on the Iran sanctions, and I was working with the administration. The administration did not oppose them. They opposed the timing of it. They had a timing issue because they thought they had the prerogative to be able to negotiate, as I am now arguing we should have. But the Senate, in its infinite wisdom, decided no and went ahead and passed them, and the timing was decided for the administration. Now, I don't know any administration that doesn't like to conduct its foreign policy on its terms. And I don't know any Congress that doesn't like to, weigh in. Now, here's the deal. There's a way for us to get the best of both worlds. I have come here representing the President, telling you that the President is committed. If this fails, he is going to want to ratchet up because we're going to have to do what we have to do to make sure they don't get a nuclear capacity. Now, this is important, though, Mr. Chairman. I know you got to have a chance to answer some of the questions here. I think it's important.
Well, we're giving you that chance, Mr.
Well, I want to just make this point because it's important to how we could proceed. We are committed to asking you for additional sanctions if we fail. We will need them. And I'm asking you, work with us. We will work with you now in support of those. Let's frame what they might be, how they might be, and we could certainly be ready. I'm asking you not to do it now because of the relationship with our P5+1 and the message that it sends, but you're wrong when you say that the administration is not going to come and ask for them. You're just dead wrong. We're telling you we will. Moreover, with respect to the facilities that exist or anything else, if they started to spin more centrifuges, it's clear to us they're not serious. That would be such a flagrant violation of this. It would not only invite more sanctions, it might
Well, they're spending 9,000 now.
Okay.
if they started to spend, but they're not allowed to hook up the ones that are in Fordow. They have been restricted in that. They're not allowed to put additional centrifuges in place. They have 19,000. They could be hooking them all up. They're not going to do that. But let's say they did. Let's say that they say, the hell with you, we're going for, and our inspectors see what they're doing. We have the absolute capacity deployed now to deal with that if we had to from a military point of view, which they know we have and will not invite. And we could not only terminate those facilities, but we could obviously set back that program for some time. Now, it comes with a whole different set of costs and different calculations, but that has not been taken off the table.
We're going to go to Mr.
Always
Smith.
has that ability.
We're going to go to Mr. Smith of New Jersey, and I'm going to suggest, members, we're going to hold to 5 minutes. So ask your question, we'll get the response, and we'll move along. Thank you.
My turn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. Secretary, last spring, Congressman Frank Wolf chaired a hearing on an American pastor, Saeed Abedini, who is unjustly jailed in Iran. His wife, Naghmeh, testified that the State Department had told her that there was nothing that could be done. She was shocked and dismayed, but we were all grateful that in response to her testimony and her appeal, you issued a much welcomed statement on behalf of her imprisoned husband. On Thursday, Naghmeh will testify before my subcommittee and the subcommittee of Ileana Ross-Layton, joint committees. And from her advanced testimony, she will say, he has been beaten until the pain has been so great he can't stand. I fear for the worst. Even worse, I fear that our children, Rebecca, who is 7, and Jacob Cyrus, who is 5, may never see their daddy again. Then she goes on to say, my husband is suffering because he is a Christian. He is suffering because he is an American. Yet his own government, at least the executive and diplomatic representatives, has abandoned him. Don't we owe it to him as a nation to stand up for his human rights and for his freedom? She goes on to say, while I am grateful for President Obama's willingness to express concern about my husband and the other imprisoned Americans, including Amir Hekmati and Robert Levinson, I was devastated to learn that the administration didn't even ask for my husband's release when directly seated across the table from the leaders of the government that holds him captive. So my first question would be, is that true? Did we raise Abedini's case directly with the Iranians in the negotiations on the nuclear issue?
The answer is that is not true. I personally raised the issue with Foreign Minister Zarif when I first met him, the very first time. And we have not linked it directly to the nuclear issue because we believe that prejudices them. And it also prejudices the negotiation. We don't want them to become the hostages or pawns of a process that then gets played against something they want with respect to the nuclear program, nor do you, I think. We want them returned because they're American citizens, because they have to be accountable to us for them, and because they deserve to be returned.
With all due respect,
Fundamental
Mr. Secretary,
humanitarian basis.
wasn't that...
And we are, believe me, I'm not at liberty to go into what is happening on it, and that is the difficulty in some of these situations many times, because there are back channels and other kinds of efforts that are engaged in, but we have never stopped trying to secure their release or raising that issue with our representative nations that represent us in Tehran, with the Swiss, with the Swedish, with others. It is a constant process, and we are engaged in that effort.
And I do appreciate that, but it seems to me that there was a window of opportunity when they wanted something and wanted it desperately to raise the issue at that negotiating table.
Well,
let me ask you this.
Congressman Smith, let me
before you
just say
answer,
something.
before include this in your answer.
This opportunity is huge and still exists, but we're not going to link them to the nuclear because it prejudices them.
But he is at risk right now of death. He's been transferred to an even more ominous prison. He's in a cell with known murderers. He woke up with a knife next to his face.
I'm happy to sit with you in a classified venue, providing it is cleared appropriately, and I can tell you what we're doing, but it is an ongoing and constant effort.
Do you have expectations that he and the others will be freed?
I have a hope I can't speak for what they'll do or not do, but
Well,
I am constantly...
The chairman talked about how if there's respect for human rights of their own people, it raises our sense of trust, even though you say trust and test. But it seems to me that here we have an American...
I didn't say trust. I said test and verify.
You said
Nothing
test and verify,
based on trust yet, certainly.
But again, it raises even more serious questions about their credibility when an American is being tortured and we're conducting a negotiation and he's not even... I know he's part of it on the side, but not...
Understand.
It ought to be central.
Obviously, we have to make some very tough decisions about what affects what.
I understand.
We believe it would disadvantage them. They would become pawns to the process. And it could prolong it, could make it more risky or dangerous. But
I'm almost out of time, and I have one other question.
Okay.
I apologize.
No problem.
It disadvantages them according to whom? I mean, they are the ones, they are in charge. They don't care about public opinion. But there was a Times of Israel report that 4 Iranians were released, including Galikan Tajik, Sir Afri, and Atarodi. Was that in any way linked in terms of the nuclear negotiations?
No.
Either before or after? No direct.
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
No.
Thank you.
And one last thing, just to say to you on this, look, we have a lot of problems with Iran. I mean, you know, they're supporting Hezbollah. Hezbollah's in Syria. They're supporting Syria, Assad. They are purveyors of terrorism, as people have described here. The Iranians, you know, there was a plot taking place to blow up an ambassador here in a restaurant in Washington. There are a number of different serious issues that exist. And they're not tied either to this because the nuclear file is the most critical, most pressing, most urgent with respect to Israel, the region, and us, and the world in terms of proliferation. And it is critical to be disciplined and focused and targeted on that program and get that under control. And meanwhile, we are continuing to put to test their bona fides on all of these other issues.
We go now to Mr. Albio Cirrus from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. You know, Mr. Secretary, in your statement you made, you stated that there were no guarantees and that you have serious questions regarding these negotiations. And obviously, we are all skeptical for the very reasons you just stated to Mr. Smith. My concern is we have this window of negotiations. Who determines whether negotiations are going well? Are we going to have a scenario where you're going to come back to us and say, well, look, we're moving forward, I need another 6 months, or I need another 3 months? Who determines whether we're making progress or not, or we're going to cut off the negotiations and we're going to come back to the Congress and say, listen, we tried, you're committed to the sanctions, let's do this in a week? I mean,
Congressman, we will, obviously, the President of the United States, my team, will make the initial judgment. But we're accountable to you and to the American people through you. So we will obviously have to confer. We'll come up here. I'm sure you'll want to hear from us somewhere in the middle of this or somewhere in the process. And we will, needless to say, brief you in the appropriate places and in the appropriate manner. And you'll join us, I hope, in making that judgment. But, you know, this is in all of our interests to get this right.
Do you see a scenario where you're going to come back to us and say, look, we need more time, and
you know,
meanwhile...
I'm not going to say that it won't happen, but it's not our preference. And my hope is that this can be resolved sooner rather than later. My hope is we could even move faster than the 6 months. I think there's a chance, an outside chance, that might be able to be possible. So I can't tell you today. We left a provision that you could extend the 6 months, but it has to be by mutual consent. So if we think they're not doing it and they want to extend, we obviously will be reluctant to. If, on the other hand, we're really making progress and we think we're on track, we may come to you and describe that to you, and you may concur in the judgment that it's worth a few more months or something. My hope is, and my expectation is, that will not have to happen.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I think that would
But it could.
That would send a terrible message if we keep extending these negotiations.
I said, my expectation is it would not happen. It could, but I don't expect it. And my hope is that we get it done sooner rather than the later.
Okay. You know, I keep reading about the resolve of the Iranians to get this nuclear program done. And quite frankly, I just don't know if this diplomatic effort on their behalf is really serious. Do you sense that there's sincerity in this? Any sincerity in this?
Whose sincerity?
The Iranians.
Well, it's not my job to measure sincerity, or it's my job to lay down a process by which we can measure it. And thus far, they have indicated they're ready to do things that make a difference, but they haven't done them yet. So we have to get the implementation moving, and we have to start moving down those 6 months. I just said to you, we're not going to go by virtue of words. This is based on actions. So it's test and verify. And we need to verify it and put it to the test. That's what we're saying to you.
Because I really don't think that they care what their people think in Iran. I think this is a regime that the leader makes the decisions, and whether the Iranian people are happy that we are negotiating doesn't mean anything to them.
Well, you know, I think your comment sort of speaks for itself. They obviously, the supreme leader is the supreme leader.
Right. All right, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Rohrabacher of California.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us. And I know it's a grueling situation to face, but we appreciate you being here with us. Rarely do we get a chance to ask you some questions, so I've got a few housekeeping questions to ask before I go into the issue of the day. I am introducing a bill today that will allow 3,000 refugees from Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty, now Camp Liberty, refugee status, and thus will permit them to be enabled to come to the United States. Hundreds of these people have been slaughtered. They live under constant threat of being murdered. We know that. And will this administration be supporting my legislation to prevent these people from being slaughtered by this pro-Mullah regime that we have in Iraq now?
Well, Congressman, I've gone to the lengths of appointing a special representative to work exclusively to get the
Right. I'm just asking about we have
well,
legislation.
I need to see the legislation, but in principle, we're trying to find a place for them to go,
So in principle, but
here.
you do, but in principle, you would agree with letting these refugees have refugee status, so they can come here.
We're trying to find a place for them to go now.
Okay. So, but in principle, do you agree that?
In principle, I'd like to see the legislation, but I can't speak for the president.
All right. Thank you.
This one unseen, but
all right. I'm trying to get the answer, but I understand, Mr. Secretary. It's been reported that there was live drone footage 2 hours into the attack on our consulate in Benghazi. Further, it was reported that there were closed-circuit cameras on the outer walls of the consulate, and one State Department official has been quoted as saying that the main gate camera revealed large numbers of armed men, flowing into the compound, end of quote, at 9:40 that night. We have not seen those videos. First of all, do the videos exist? If they do exist, will you make them available to this committee?
I haven't seen any drone video footage, but I have seen video footage of the facility itself, and I've seen those people pouring in.
Right.
And we all saw them. We saw them in the Senate. I think they were made available to the House too.
Okay. So, are you aware of any videos that have not been made?
I am not. No, I'm not.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Again, when we're talking about the issue at hand today, we all should recognize that you are trying to deal with a challenge, a threat that you did not make, and that was around while the Republicans were in charge of government, and they did not succeed. So that being considered, I'm going to ask you some tough questions, but I do understand that you didn't make the problem, and you're here trying to do what you can to what you believe will solve the issue. When you talk about we're not going to trust but verify, we're going to test but verify, and then you refer to the leader of the government there as the supreme leader. Quite frankly, that's groveling, but test but verify. The fact is, he is not a supreme leader. He is not some democratically elected governor of that. He is a vicious man with a bloody background, and we are treating him like the supreme leader. Isn't that groveling before a group of people who do not deserve that? Of course they're not going to, at that point, of course they're going to think that they've got leverage and they can do things if we treat them with that type of respect the same way we would a democratic government.
There's no equivalency, Congressman. It's just his title. It's his name. That's what they treat him as.
Well, that's what they call him. And are we necessarily going to treat Adolf Hitler as the Fuhrer? Or this is not the supreme leader. This is a man who holds power through brute force. And as I say, instead of trust but verify, instead of test but verify, it looks like it's grovel but verify to me.
Congressman, I just don't agree with you about the question of test but verify being groveling. The point I'm making is there's no issue of trust involved.
All right.
We are going to protect our interests by testing what they're doing.
I understand the point you're making, sir.
I don't consider anything that we have done here with respect to this to be anything except acting in the interests of our nation and of our friends in the region. And I think we are better off today than we were the day before we made this agreement, when they were progressing to do whatever they wanted in this program. Now they're not. Now they are, because of the sanctions, negotiating with us with respect to a final agreement.
We'll look at your proposal very closely. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Ted Deutsch of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. And first, I'd like to thank you for your efforts on behalf of my constituent, Robert Levinson, on behalf of his family, who greatly appreciates your personal efforts and those of the State Department and so many in government. We hope you'll continue to press for his release so he can come home safely to South Florida. I wanted to talk about sanctions a little bit and take some issue with your premise that we put sanctions in place to get to negotiation. I don't think that's why we put sanctions in place. We put sanctions in place to get to negotiation on our way to getting the Iranians to give up their nuclear weapons capability. That's where we were going. And the concern that a lot of us have, I think, is that if we don't set some marker, right? You asked us to work with you, we ask the same back. If we don't set some marker that says if there is not a deal, and which we thought might come in 6 months, but the interim agreement now says the goal is to have it in 12 months. But if there's not a deal, then these additional sanctions that we passed during the summer, when many told us not to because Rouhani wouldn't even negotiate if we did. But if we should put those in place so it's clear what will happen if there's not a deal. And I do think that we can work with you on this. But no one's suggesting that the legislation imposed those additional sanctions this afternoon. But if it's not 6 months because you need space, then let's figure out what it is. Is it 7 months? Is it 8 months? At some point, why wouldn't it be in our interest and the interest of our allies to make clear what will happen if the Iranians continue to push and extend and there is no deal? Why can't we work together in the interest of a negotiating position to help with diplomacy, to strengthen diplomacy in order to do that?
Congressman, we've made it clear to them what the implications are of not being successful. They know what the stakes are. And we have told them there will not be new sanctions of any kind imposed while we are negotiating. So if Congress votes for new sanctions, Congress is going off on its own, and it raises a question. Most importantly, I'm not as worried about how they interpret it as I am worried about how our allies, our friends, our partners interpret it. They're part of this. And if the United States sort of just lumbers off on its own and does its own thing when we are working with those partners, they have a right to say, we're in partnership. And
They do. They do, Mr. Secretary.
Well, let me just finish one thing, though. The other thing is, you know, I've never suggested, I think at the beginning of my statement here, I told you that the reason, you know, our whole policy is that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. So we're not in this for the sake of negotiations for negotiations' sake. We're here because those negotiations are to prevent them from getting the program. Obviously, I finished the sentence. But, you know, if we don't negotiate, I think, in a way, I don't want to give them an excuse or any other rationale for upping the ante, changing the...
I do. Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry, we're limited in time.
Let me ask you something. Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Why is it, if they know they're listening to us now, they know there are going to be more sanctions. We've told them 100 times. What is wrong with our working together to tee up what we think might be appropriate if there is failure, and then do it?
Completely agree. I completely agree. We should tee it up, and we should tee it up with a date certain.
Doesn't mean passing it here now.
We should tee it up with a date certain, and if we all agree that at some date...
You can't have a date certain until you know how your negotiations are working. You don't want to make a presumption.
My concern is we've heard the argument before that sanctions undermine international unity. When the Senate voted unanimously on the Iranian Central Bank sanctions, it was the same day that the Department of Treasury sent a letter to every senator telling them not to vote for it. Not only did it pass unanimously, but it was vital in changing Iran's nuclear calculus and the world's approach to Iran because of the decision that they had to make about whether to do business with Iran or whether to do business with the United States. So I would like to work together to try to tee something up, as you said. I just have one other quick question. You said that oil sanctions continue as they are in place with no diminishment of oil sanctions. And yet the sanctions relief provides that 1 million barrels per day is now a fixed amount during the 6 months that the Iranians can export. And yet, under our existing sanctions, there needs to be a significant reduction in the amount that they can export. So it seems that there's a contradiction.
What we did, Congressman, is we put in place a pause for the few nations, China, India, South Korea, Japan. There are a number of nations who are working with us very closely in sanctions enforcement, who have been reducing their consumption of oil now over this period of time. And they have reached a point where it is very, very difficult for them to further reduce without serious impact on global economy and their economy. So in effect, we worked a way that we were able to release some of the money against giving them a pause for these 6 months because of that difficulty. Now, that's not a change in the sanctions regime. It's simply a pause in its application, but it still applies, and it will apply after the 6 months are over if we don't have an agreement.
We're going to need to go to Mr. Joe Wilson of South Carolina. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Elliott Engel, for your leadership, too. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. But you can see this is a bipartisan concern. I think there are excellent questions on both sides because many of us believe that the policies of this administration are putting the American people at risk, our allies at risk, Israel, the Persian Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. In fact, with the missile capability that Iran has, our NATO allies, Turkey, Bulgaria, Greece. And so there are just great concerns that we have. And I truly agree with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that this agreement is a mistake. Additionally, I agree with Ambassador John Bolton. In the Weekly Standard, he wrote, quote, "This interim agreement is badly skewed from America's perspective. Iran retains full capacity to enrich uranium, thus abandoning a decade of Western insistence in Security Council resolutions that Iran stop all uranium enrichment activities, allowing Iran to continue enriching, and despite modest, indeed utterly inadequate measures to prevent it from increasing its enriched uranium stockpiles and its overall nuclear infrastructure, lays the predicate for Iran itself to fully enjoy its right to enrichment of any final agreement. Indeed, the interim agreement itself acknowledges that a comprehensive solution will involve a mutually defined enrichment program. In exchange for superficial concessions, Iran achieved three critical breakthroughs. First, it bought time to continue all aspects of its nuclear weapons program. The agreement does not cover centrifuge manufacturing and testing, weaponization research and fabrication, and the entire ballistic missile program. Indeed, given that the interim agreement contemplates periodic renewals, Iran may have gained all the time it needs to achieve weaponization, not to simply a handful of nuclear weapons, but dozens more, end of quote. I also agree with Democratic Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey. In the Hill last week, it was pointed out that, quote, he argued that it was harsh sanctions that had brought Iran to the negotiating table in the first place. He added that he found many additional flaws within the agreement besides its approach on sanctions, end of quote. Mr. Secretary, again, we see how bipartisan this is, and I'm just really pleased. This is nothing personal. The American people are concerned. Our allies are concerned. Clearly, sanctions make a difference. What are the baselines or red lines or markers of success that you will be looking for in 6 months?
Very simple. Iran's inability to have ever, without our knowing it, with a sufficient amount of time, a huge amount of time, that we could do something about it to stop it, any kind of weaponization or nuclear weapons program. Bottom line. Look, you just said decades of resolutions that they abandoned enrichment. What'd they get you?
Well,
What'd those decades of resolutions get you?
They have gotten the people of Iran, hopefully to the point, this is the great culture of Persia, hopefully for the people of Iran, an opportunity for them, the Green Revolution, to finally succeed.
Congressman, that's a wishful thought, but meanwhile, their program continues to grow. Meanwhile, Israel is more at risk. In 2003, my friend, they had 164 centrifuges. Now they have 19,000. You know what Zarif said to me? You know what your sanctions have gotten you? 19,000.
But also, that's clearly indicating that they're not dealing in good faith, that they cannot be trusted, and even with tests, verify.
Nobody has said to you, I never sat here and said, I've never said the word good faith in terms of what they're doing. Everybody knows that you don't build a secret hole in a mountain to have centrifuges and enrich if you're operating good faith. Everybody knows you don't refuse to sign the additional protocols. Everybody knows you don't deny the IAEA access. Everybody knows you don't go up to 19,000 centrifuges. So that's sort of we all understand that. The issue here is what are we going to do about it so that we don't have a sudden breakout that threatens Israel and all the countries in the region and ourselves. Now, the truth is, you went further. You said something like they bought time to continue all aspects of weaponization.
Yes.
No, they haven't. Because in order to weaponize, you have to have highly enriched uranium. And under our plan, they're going the opposite direction. They're destroying their highly enriched uranium.
And it appears to me to be benign observation.
We would know, Congressman, we would know immediately.
We're going to go now to Mr. Ami Bera of California.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, and thank you, Secretary Kerry, for joining us today. We don't agree on a lot in this town, but I would say, certainly on this committee, throughout Congress, and I believe the administration, and to quote your words, we all agree on one issue, which is Iran must not and will not acquire a nuclear weapon. I think there's general consensus on that. On Saturday, the President, when being asked at Sabin Institute what he envisioned a final agreement might look like, he talked about an agreement that would let Iran enrich enough nuclear material for energy, but with enough in the way of restrictions to assure the United States and Israel that it could not produce a nuclear weapon. I think I'm quoting that correctly. When asked the chances of success of getting to that agreement, to quote the President, I wouldn't say it's more than 50-50, but we have to try. I think we agree that we should try because the outcome of failure is probably one that we don't want to see. But given Iran's history, many of us in this body, on this committee, and myself personally, remain very skeptical. And certainly, as you approach the negotiations, I think you've expressed a healthy set of skepticism as well. But again, we have to try. any agreement that we enter into has to, and again, I think to quote you, it has to halt their progress and roll it back, and it has to lengthen the time to nuclear breakout. So with this model of test and verify, how can we guarantee that they aren't continuing to enrich? They aren't continuing to enrich above the 3% threshold or above a 5%.
It's a really good
threshold.
question.
And within the context, do they understand how skeptical members of this body are, and how if there is any backsliding? We've already, in a unanimous way, supported increased sanctions. Over in the Senate, they're probably very close to. If there's progress, how close they are.
How close they are.
How skeptical we are within this body about their intentions, and
Well, look, the answer is that the purpose of our first step is to know with certainty what they're doing. And they have said to us, I mean, that is part of their proffer to us. If they say it's going to be a peaceful program, they say, we will allow you unlimited access. We will allow restraints. We will make these things happen. And that's sort of what we have to put to the test now. Now, we will now have access to this secret underground facility. We haven't had that. That's a big deal. We will now have access to Natanz, and we will know what they're doing there. We will have sufficient access to the heavy water reactor. Now, as we go down the road here, there are going to have to be built-in, very significant, intrusive verification mechanisms so that we know to a certainty. When I say to a certainty, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to sit there and say to us, and others, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, they're going to look at us and say, are we really protected? And we have a responsibility as an administration to negotiate an agreement where we can come to all of you and withstand appropriate scrutiny of what the framework of this agreement is. Does it answer the question that you know what they're doing? Does it give you adequate insight, ongoing? Is it possible for them to somehow be cheating on you and you don't know it? Is there a way that you can, fail-safe guarantee that there's no hidden enrichment taking place? Is there a guarantee that you're able to say this program is, to a certainty, a peaceful program? Now, as I said, there are other countries that engage in peaceful programs, and we have inspectors and inspection and a level of intrusion. It'll take Iran a period of time, obviously, where that's going to have to be greater for them. Why? Because of the record here, because of the history that has raised these sanctions to the level they are, that has brought the global community together in this effort. And it's up to Iran, really, to decide how fast they want to prove this and how far they're willing to go to make it clear that it is certain. If it isn't certain, we have a problem.
Mike McCall of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. As President Kennedy once said, let us never fear to negotiate, but let us not negotiate out of fear. As an American, I want to wish you my heartfelt, sincere wish that your negotiations are successful. I think every American wants that. I think that the stakes you're dealing with, or the national security stakes, have never been higher than they are with Iran, and from a national security, homeland security standpoint as well. I have some concerns about this deal. We've worked on these sanctions for a decade. We've gotten to the point where we can possibly negotiate. I sent a letter to Senator Reid, signed by 70 members of Congress, to continue and vote on the sanctions bill that we passed by 400 votes in the House so that we could strengthen your hand, strengthen your leverage in these negotiations. My concern is that this deal violates 6 UN Security Council resolutions to give Iran the right to enrich, that it sends a message to our partners in the Middle East that it's okay for a state sponsor of terrorism to enrich, but not for them. I'm concerned that it could spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East if not done correctly. I'm concerned it deals nothing with the technology aspects. As we know, they have the capability to hit Israel and Europe with its missiles currently, and the Pentagon projects that they have ICBM capability of hitting the United States by 2015. And I think most disturbingly, Mr. Secretary, that President Rouhani just said this week that Iran's centrifuges, in his words, quote unquote, will never stop spinning. Now, I've talked to officials in the Bush administration who claim that one of the biggest mistakes made was North Korea. I think Iran is playing the North Korean playbook, if you will, and also trying to play the United States. As Homeland Security Chairman, I'm concerned about $7 billion of relief without any assurance that that money will not be used for further terrorism and will not be used to further a nuclear weapons program. I think that we should negotiate, but I believe that lifting sanctions should not be done until they have dismantled their nuclear program. In other words, Mr. Secretary, are you willing at the end of the 6 months, in the final deal, to say, look, we're willing to lift the sanctions when you stop enriching uranium?
Well, let me speak for a minute to the question of the never stop spinning the centrifuges. If they're, less than 1,000 or 500 or whatever they are, they may never stop spinning them, but they're very limited in what they're going to be able to do. The outlines of this have to take shape now. And we're very clear. This agreement, as I read earlier to you, envisions, and they've accepted this, envisions severe restraints. Mutually defined program with mutually agreed parameters consistent with practical needs. What are the practical needs? To have some medical research, maybe, to feed enough fuel into a legitimate power program, which may be done in consortium with other people with intrusive knowledge of what's going on as a result. I mean, there are a lot of things here yet to be filled out in this. So the answer is, at the end of this, I can't tell you they might not have some enrichment, but I can tell you to a certainty it will not be possible for them to be able to turn it into a weapons program without our knowing it so far in advance that all the options that are available to us today to stop it. Let's say we weren't here talking about this, and they're proceeding down the road, and we came to you and said, hey, we got to stop it the only way we know how. That's still going to be available to us. Only it's going to be available to us with much greater foresight, much greater knowledge of what's happening, and much more restraint on whatever their program is between now and then. That does make Israel and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Egypt and all the other countries concerned much more secure.
I think you'd have more confidence from Israel, I think, and members of Congress, if you came back in 6 months and said, they can't have a peaceful program, but not enriching uranium inside Iran. And that can be done by providing that enriched uranium to them outside of Iran. I would urge you to pursue that.
That deal was on the table a number of years ago, but that deal, I'm afraid, has probably been lost.
Well, I believe
we go to
wrong.
Gentleman's time has expired. We go to Jerry Connolly of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, when's the last time we had a negotiated agreement of any kind with Iran?
I think 10 years ago there was some restraint on some level of their program.
Kind of an infrequent phenomenon of the last
That was the first
decades.
time. Well, we haven't really talked to them face to face in 35, 40 years, whatever it is, since 1979.
Some of the critics of this interim agreement, frame it as...
Let me reframe that. There have been a couple of meetings where people have talked, but there's been no negotiation
no agreement
of this kind.
Some of the critics would have one believe that an alternative to what you and your team, working with our allies, have hammered out here, really could be improved upon and actually made into a comprehensive agreement. Why have an interim confidence-building agreement when really the only agreement that counts is the complete dismantlement of existing stockpiles, sites, processing facilities, and the like. And that's come from some friends or so-called friends who have criticized the interim agreement. I wonder if you could comment on that. Why didn't you get a comprehensive agreement that meets all of our concerns?
Well, it's not an interim agreement. Let me frame this very carefully for everybody. It's not an interim agreement. It's a first step towards a comprehensive agreement. Now, why did we do that? For the simple reason we wanted to make our friends and ourselves safer. And if you simply sat there and negotiated towards the comprehensive agreement, then you're getting sucked into the North Korea syndrome, where you're having 6 parties here negotiating while they develop their program. And then they go explode something, and it's too late. We definitively did not want to fall into that trap. So we insisted on trying to get a step where we could hold things where they are while we put to test the sincerity and willingness to do the whole thing. Now, if they're willing to do the whole thing, then we have lost nothing. And if they're not willing to do the whole thing, we have not allowed them to progress to a point where we've put people at greater risk. That's what I think makes this a smarter approach.
Mr. Secretary, you talked about inspections. What's our current capability in terms of inspections? Can we go in every day?
No.
Or any day into Iran and inspect what they're doing?
No, we can't. We can't at all. The IAEA is allowed to get into some facilities on I think once a week they can get into the 2 facilities we're now going into daily. And they've been able to go into Iraq, I think, on a sporadic basis. I think it's about once a month.
And the agreement that you all have negotiated allows daily inspections?
Daily.
On all of the sites we're concerned about?
No. Daily on Fordow, daily on Natanz, and monthly on Iraq. May even wind up being a little more than monthly, but it's definitely monthly.
So significant change in our capacity to look at and view what's going on.
Well, very much so. And in addition to that, we have access to their centrifuge storage facilities, their centrifuge workshops, production facilities, and we have the plans that will be given us with respect to Iraq. So we have much greater manifestation of a kind of willingness to open up and put this to the test.
It's an adage in negotiations, Mr. Secretary, that you want to try to let it be a win-win, not a I win, you lose kind of situation. And often that requires face-saving measures to allow someone to step back from the brink. What's in it for Iran? What motivates Iran to want to, A, reach this agreement, and B, reach the ultimate part of this agreement?
Well, I think Iran mostly wants to get out from under the sanctions ultimately because their economy is in shambles. Their people are hurting, and there's enormous pressure on President Rouhani to deliver. You recall that Rouhani was not the choice of the Supreme Leader, that Rouhani was really a reflection of votes that were cast, and it was a surprise. And then he promised the people of Iran in his election campaign that he was going to deliver change. He was going to try and reach out to the West, change the relationships, and improve the economy. And I think that's really what's been driving them.
Mr. Ted Poe of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to make it clear that I do not question the motives or the interest that you have and the administration has in doing what's best for the United States. I really believe that that's what you want to do, is make the world safer for us and everyone else. On this particular agreement and the proposal, I disagree. It seems to me that we're giving away the farm and the mineral rights as well. It seems to me also that rather than make them dismantle their nuclear weapons program, we're just freezing the program, which could be thawed out at any time down the road. And these are my concerns about Iran and this situation, then I'm going to have two questions if I don't talk too long. The first concern, of course, is their continuing development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. When I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel a couple of weeks ago, he said that they are not developing those ICBMs for us, Israel. They can reach us with what they already have. They're developing them for you, United States. And so I'm concerned about that. They continue to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. It seems that they would want something on the tips of those intercontinental ballistics down the road, like weapons. The second concern are the terror groups that they sponsor all over the world in places that most Americans have never even heard of. Hezbollah, of course, their activities not only in the Middle East, but in other parts of the world, the Quds Force, IRGC. They are causing mischief, as you know, everywhere, including in Syria, trying to support a rogue government there as a puppet state maybe for Iran. Mr. Rouhani is a smooth talker, in my opinion. He's different than Ahmadinejad, who was a flamethrower, bomb thrower with his rhetoric, but he seems to continue to hang his own people and smile in the process of that. And of course, there's always the situation that we continue to talk about because it hadn't been resolved of the MEK, the dissident group, now 5 attacks on them. No one's been brought to justice in the Iraqi government, and the criminals haven't been brought to justice. The latest one, excuse my partner here, when they were attacked on September the 1st, the murders occurred in Iraq. 50 people were murdered, many of them murdered while they were wounded in the different locations, tracked down and murdered. I believe that Iran was behind this attack. And of course, no one's been held accountable, not Iran, not the Iraqis, and not the criminals themselves. And there are some other examples. My question is this, big picture. Has the Supreme Leader changed his position that Iran wants to eliminate Israel and Iran wants to eliminate the United States?
Congressman, let me begin by saying to you that I agree with you, each of the concerns that you've expressed. There is no question but that the ICBM missile program of Iran is of serious concern. And we believe, inserted language in the agreement and an understanding in the agreement that that's very much one of our concerns going forward, is the weaponization. Likewise, the terror, support for terror, I raised it earlier, and I let the record just speak to that. With respect to the stated positions, public positions of Iran and its rhetoric, no, it hasn't changed, and it's very inflammatory and very threatening.
Do you think, excuse me, Mr. Secretary, because I just have 1 minute left, do you believe it is still the goal of the Supreme Leader to destroy Israel and destroy the United States?
Well, you know, when you say, do I believe that that's...
Well, do you think, do you believe, what do you think about that position? He states that.
I think their rhetoric is dangerous and threatening and, you know, incredibly counterproductive and damaging to any potential rational relationship. But
reclaiming my time, I want one other question. No, I don't want to reclaim my time, Mr. Secretary. Ask the question.
My but is...
I'm reclaiming my time. My other question is this, Mr. Secretary. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, will then Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt also then rush to get nuclear weapons as well?
If Iran got a nuclear weapon, there would be an arms race in the region for certain, which is one of the reasons why they're not going to get a nuclear weapon.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
We go now to Mr. Absolutely, Mr. Secretary, go ahead.
I just want to finish that there are lots of people in the world who use outrageous and outlandish rhetoric, and they play to their street, and they play to their constituency, and they have no means of actually implementing what they're saying. But we take seriously the threat of Iran and the potential of a nuclear weapon. And that is why the centerpiece of the President's foreign policy is they will not get a nuclear weapon while this President is President of the United States.
Juan Vargas of California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I want to premise my remarks by saying that I have nothing but the highest respect and regard for you personally and professionally. In fact, one of my biggest disappointments politically was that you didn't become president. We worked very hard out in California for you, and I think you would have been a magnificent president. So I'm not a so-called friend, I'm a believer. However, when it comes to this deal, I'm completely against it. I do think it's naive. And I don't think it makes us safer, unfortunately, and I don't think it makes our allies safer, especially Israel. Instead, I agree with those that say that sanctions were working, but that we didn't ratchet them up enough, that we should have tightened them down even more. So the choice becomes whether the Iranians decide that they want a functioning economy or they want a nuclear weapons capability, a weapons program. I think we need a corollary to your axiom that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Instead, we should say that we won't agree to anything until everything is agreed. We need that comprehensive deal first. And you said, has Iran changed its nuclear calculus? We don't know. We should be skeptical. I'm not skeptical. I'm not skeptical at all. I don't think it's changed its calculus. I think it continues to want a nuclear weapons program. I do want to give you plenty of time to answer those questions, so I won't go all the way until there's 2 seconds left and then say, Mr. Secretary, would you like to answer those 50 questions? But I do want to know, I mean, it seems to me naive, to be frank, on its face.
Well, first of all, Congressman, I'm really pleased that you think I would have made a good president, and I appreciate your support in that effort, and I hate to disappoint you that I've come up with something in conjunction with the administration and our efforts that you think is naive. I think it is anything but naive. Anything but. And I think that for many reasons. You know, I've been thinking about and working on the Iran file, so to speak, for a lot of years. And there are a lot of people who have a different calculation about what Iran might or might not do. It's all well and good to sit here and theoretically say, ratchet up the sanctions and you'll drive them into a place where they'll crush. But you know what? The Russians and the Chinese won't be with you doing that. And ultimately, the Europeans might not be either, because as you ratchet them up and they think it's unreasonable based on their willingness to explore the diplomacy, you lose them too. And then guess what you've done? You've actually undone the sanctions, not reinforced them. Let me go a step further. There are a lot of people in the intel community who will sit and tell you, and I urge you to get briefed on it, who will tell you that there are a whole school of thought in Iran, the hardliners, who welcome the idea that the United States might whack them because they think they'll be heroes in the street, and they think they'll be true to the revolution, and they think that as a result they'll actually be stronger as a regime. And there are many people who believe that if the regime got into real extremis on the economy, what would happen is the Supreme Leader will say, well, I'm not surrendering. We're not ever going to surrender to the great Satan. Now we're going to go for the weapon because it's the only thing we can do. And we'll dig deeper, and we'll go more secret, and we'll take whatever it takes, but we're going to get it because that's all the United States of America understands. Now, that's an alternative theory to this notion that you can just go out there and raise your sanctions ad infinitum and you're going to win. We're in a good place now to negotiate. We're at a level of reasonableness and capacity to perhaps get an agreement. Now, maybe we won't get the agreement, and we'll have to do the other thing anyway. But you know, one of the things I learned a long time ago is, you know, you're going to take a nation to war, you better have exhausted all the possibilities of trying to get a peaceful resolution before you do it. And we are doing that now. We are going through the testing and testing to see whether or not they're serious, and if not, we have all the options available to us. But there's nothing naive about what we're doing. It is calculated. It may be wrong. You may find that it's a miscalculation, but it's not miscalculation based on naivete. We understand the dangers. We understand the risks. We understand how critical this is and how high the stakes are. And I believe, absolutely, no question in my mind, if we were just negotiating and pressing further, we would be inviting a prolonged process which would drive them to want to get the weapon even more and then you'd be at a place where you might get to a negotiation, but they're even closer to having the weapon than they are today. Much more dangerous.
Well, my last 8 seconds, I pray you're right. And again, I encourage you. I think you're a man of great courage, and I hope the best for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Salmon of Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have 3 questions, and they all deal with the issue of accountability. And I'm going to ask the 3 questions, and then I'll turn the time over to you. It is an alarming fact that this agreement that you struck with the Iranians gives them access to $7 billion in cash. Can you assure the American people that not one single dollar of that new money coming into Iran is going to be used to kill one American soldier? The second question is that I don't feel like the Obama administration has a stellar track record on the issue of accountability. From Benghazi, NSA, AP, IRS, to Fast and Furious, these are all dismal examples of where we still don't have answers to why they happen or who's ultimately accountable. So where does the buck stop if this new deal with Iran doesn't work like it's promised? Are you going to be held ultimately accountable, or the President, or who in the administration? And finally, continuing on that theme of accountability, the administration claimed to not be in negotiations with Iran, when they in fact were. State Department has admitted that Victoria Nuland misled reporters when in February she flatly denied the existence of direct secret bilateral talks with Iran. It turns out your department intentionally misled the American people about these negotiations taking place behind closed doors. So how can we have the confidence that the information you're giving us now is on the level, particularly since the Iranians clearly have a different interpretation of the agreement than you do? Those are my questions, and I'm very interested in your answers.
I honestly, I'd have to go back and check. I became Secretary of State, I think, February 1st. So I'm not sure what was said then or not said exactly, or what the state play was, but let me find out. With respect to accountability, I'm hanging out there. I'll be accountable. I have absolute confidence that you will hold me accountable. I said to the chairwoman a moment ago, I said I don't think the sanctions regime will come apart. She says it's the death knell of it. We're going to know in a few months, so I'll be accountable.
And as to my very first question, with the new money that they're getting, and I'll take at face value the amount that you've speculated, $7 billion, with that new money coming into Iran, can you assure the American people that not a dollar of that money is going to be used to kill an American soldier?
Congressman, I wish I could give you that kind of an assurance, but I have no ability to tell you exactly what fungibility there is in money in Iran, or where the budget goes, or what happens. My prayer is that no soldier will be killed as a consequence of anything that Iran chooses to do. And our hope is that as a consequence of this process, maybe we can get at some of those other issues that are very significant between our two countries.
Finally, I think this is boiled down to a disagreement of whether or not ultimately we want them to be able to continue any kind of a nuclear program within Iran versus being able to go forward and not have any kind of a nuclear program.
When you say nuclear, do you mean power program?
Yes,
power plant?
Any kind of a nuclear program, any kind of enrichment whatsoever. They can get all the nuclear material that they need for power by purchasing that from other countries. They don't need to be able to enrich that themselves. And the way I look at this deal, and I understand there are a lot of components, but you mentioned earlier in your initial remarks that one of the big successes of this interim deal or 6-month deal is that they have to waylay their 20% enriched uranium. But that's very insubstantial. It's a small quantity. They have a far larger quantity of 3 to 5% enriched materials, and it doesn't take a lot to get to that next level. I think we all understand that. And so it seems like a large, seems to me not like a great deal to get a small quantity of 20% enriched uranium for $7 billion.
Well, Congressman, if they don't have the ability to enrich it, and they can't during this, they're not allowed to put in any enrichment facilities, any additional facilities. They're not allowed to change that stock. So it's relative. I mean, if you think it's not worth for 6 months trying to negotiate a comprehensive deal while you hold their program where it is, then you make your judgment. We believe it is. And you know, we've proven in the last years, as we went from those 164 centrifuges to 19,000, what you get for not talking. You get closer to a bomb. So we believe it's important to try to sit down and see if we can resolve this.
We go now to Mr. David Cicilline, if we could, of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and thank you to the administration for its briefings and for the important information you have shared with us today, and thank you for the good work that you're doing. I was very pleased to hear you say, and each time the President has spoken about it, reaffirmed our commitment to ensure that Iran not be permitted to develop a nuclear weapon. And I think when people ask the question whether this deal makes us safer and makes our allies safer, the question is whether or not this is likely to make it more likely or less likely that we prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. And the skepticism that everyone has expressed is healthy, but I think the question is, does this make it more likely that we achieve this objective? And I think there seem to be very competing timelines. One is, one timeline is doing nothing and the development of a nuclear Iran. The other timeline is additional sanctions so severe that either Iran abandons its nuclear ambition or the regime is brought down. And then another timeline is this negotiation. And I think we ask questions as if nothing will happen if we don't take some action or pursue some diplomatic alternative. And so, like everyone on this panel, I hope you are successful in leading this effort, because I think the greatest safety will be achieved if we prevent a nuclear Iran and we do it as expeditiously as we can. But I want to follow up with really two questions. One is to follow up on Congressman Deutsch's question. If it is true that the Iranians are certain that if they violate this agreement, that additional sanctions will be imposed, if they're certain of that, then speak to what would be the consequence of enacting sanctions, additional sanctions, that would not be triggered until a default of some kind in the agreement, or even an effective date a year from now, or some other mechanism, if in fact they already expect that. What would be the impact on the negotiations? What would be the impact on our allies? Why wouldn't we do that as a mechanism to sort of make clear what you indicated they already know?
Because we told them we wouldn't do it while we're negotiating.
Imposing additional sanctions or passing?
Because our partners don't expect us to pass new sanctions while we're negotiating. And because our partners, if we pass them now, could get squirrely on the whole idea of the sanctions. I mean, they'll figure we're kind of doing our own thing and that we're not part of the team.
And you think that's the same view, even if the sanctions are not imposed,
but enacted? Even if the sanctions are not imposed. It implies a lack of faith in the process and an unwillingness to play by the rules that our partners are playing by.
Okay. And the second question, Mr. Secretary, is I know that, and I think this is an important point, the interim agreement says, and I quote, Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran ever seek or develop any nuclear weapons. And as you well know, there are many steps in research and development and testing that a state may undertake that are important steps to build nuclear capacity. In the past, according to IAEA, Iran has taken some of these steps and argued dual use because of civilian use. Is that an issue that you intend and can assure us that you will address in a final agreement?
It has to be, absolutely. And that's part of what we were talking about resolving all our concerns and dealing with the larger UN Security Council and ballistic missile and weaponization program issues.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It seems to me that the outlines of the first step are creating a window of opportunity, and the alternative of not proceeding aggressively in this negotiation would allow the Iranians to proceed unchecked, really, over the next 6 months or longer. And it is my hope that you will be successful and it will provide greater security to this country and to our allies in the region. And I thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Jeff Duncan of South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's quite a feat to have the Secretary of State in front of our committee twice in 1 year, and I just wanted to remind the committee that it's been 15 months since the Benghazi terrorist attacks that killed 4 brave Americans, including Tyrone Woods. The administration has brought none of the perpetrators to justice, nor has anyone been dismissed at the Department of State that may have culpability in the deaths of these brave Americans. In negotiating with Iran, the administration chose to ignore the plight of Pastor Abedini during the negotiations and decided instead to release an Iranian nuclear scientist to please the Iranians. That just baffles me. Mr. Secretary, in negotiating with Iran, you seem to give them the benefit of the doubt that they will comply with the agreement, but I agree with the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister, John Baird, who said, "We think past actions best predict future actions," and Iran has defied the United Nations Security Council and the IAEA. Simply put, Iran has not earned the right to have the benefit of the doubt. Iran's a bad actor. We all know that. Numerous hearings in this committee have pointed out Iranian activity in the Western Hemisphere. Even the Defense Minister of Israel acknowledges this in a December 9th article in the Times of Israel. He states that Iran has built an infrastructure of terror in Central and South America in order to, among other goals, have a base from which to attack the U.S. These are the guys we're negotiating with. Iran has been clearly implicated in the Buenos Aires AMIA bombings in the 1990s, and in Latin America, the administration has chosen to abandon 190 years of U.S. foreign policy by declaring the era of the Monroe Doctrine is over. Now, what kind of message does that send? It sends the wrong message to countries like Iran and also to China, Russia, North Korea about our reliability in the region. So having made all those statements, I have to ask, why trust Iran? There has been no accountability for past actions and past links to terrorism. So I've got a series of yes or no questions for you. Iran is still listed by the U.S. Department of State as a state sponsor of terrorism, correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Is Iran still supporting Hezbollah and Hamas?
Yes.
Hezbollah is still active in South America. We've established that in this committee, and the State Department has seemed to agree with that in complying with the Iranian Threat in the Western Hemisphere Act of the last Congress. So what impact do you estimate sanctions relief will have on Iranian financial and material assistance to Hezbollah and other regional proxies? If we lift these sanctions and they have $7 billion of U.S. dollars, what impact do you think that will have on their state sponsor of terrorism?
I think very little, if any, because they are a $1 trillion economy, and this is a tiny percentage of that. So they don't, they're not banking on this money in order to be able to engage in the nefarious activities they take place in, which we disagree with, all of them. I cited a moment ago our concern about the many other issues, from ballistic missiles to support for terror to support for Hezbollah. I mentioned Hezbollah earlier. So obviously all of these things concern us a lot, Congressman, but nowhere, not once today, nothing that I said intimated in any way whatsoever a benefit of any doubt. I sat here and said we're skeptical. I sat here and said they got to prove it. I sat here and said we're going to test them. I said we're not even going to mention the word trust. This is based on testing and verification. So I don't know where you get this idea about giving them any benefit of the doubt. There's no benefit of any doubt here. This is a very skeptical and tested and focused process of verifying a program that we have to account to the world for.
Let me ask you another question then. Does North Korea have nuclear weapons?
North Korea does not have a program yet that is capable, but they have had some explosions of devices.
Okay. In February and April of 2007, North Korea agreed to abandoning all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs and returning at an early date to a treaty on non-proliferation nuclear weapons and the IAEA safeguards. Supposedly, this significant achievement commits 6 parties at that time to an agreement to a denuclearized Korean peninsula. That was in February and April of 2007. Guess what? September of 2008, they were back. And we gave them 950,000 tons of fuel if they would stop their nuclear weapons program. I go back to one of the gentlemen to my left said freeze and then it would unfreeze. That's exactly what happened in North Korea. They froze it, and then they got what they wanted out of the deal, and then they restarted it. I'm afraid we're going to see this similar thing happen. Different actors, the same script. Now I yield back.
We're going to go to Louis Frankel of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I know we all agree, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your service, your perseverance, and your fortitude. And we all agree that Iran should not acquire a nuclear weapon. I have a few questions. There seems to be, in listening to my colleagues, a lot of skepticism in the room, and implicit is, it sounds to me, is the belief that pushing more sanctions would eventually bring Iran to full capitulation. So my question to you really has to do with the timing. Why you think the timing is right now for these talks, and whether you disagree with the premise that more sanctions till you reach full capitulation is possible. One question. Number two, are we getting pressure from our partners, not just about sticking with this agreement, but with actually bringing an agreement? Do you feel like they are tiring about enforcing sanctions? And then as to the $7 billion, you seem to imply that it's really more or less a drop in the bucket. I know $7 billion isn't a drop in the bucket, but you say compared to what stays in place. So what is Iran getting from this that will lead us to progress in these talks? And last, in talking about the final deal, are you going to be looking at putting back sanctions automatically if certain benchmarks are not met?
Say the last one again, I'm sorry.
Well, in the final deal, are you looking at sanctions automatically being put back if certain benchmarks are not met?
Well, let me go through each of your questions, Congresswoman. Thank you very much. Is the timing right? Is capitulation possible? And what is the timing here? Well, the timing, we believe, is right for a number of different reasons. Because we have the unity of the P5+1, because we believe that Iran, because of the change of the administration in Iran, wants to try to reach out and see if they can indeed achieve a different relationship. Now, for all the mistrust here, I have to tell you there's an equal amount, if not more, mistrust in Iran. They mistrust us. They have a complete lack of a sense of confidence that we're willing to make a deal or that we'll keep the deal. And so these things work two ways. And you know, they have a perception that we are out for regime change and that what we want to do is just hammer them and bring more sanctions. So there's a lot of doubt about whether we're going to negotiate in good faith, which is one of the reasons why there's a question here about, you know, what we wind up doing after we enter into a negotiation. Now, is capitulation possible? I don't believe that it is. I mean, you know, it depends what you, I suppose, engage in. Does the United States have the power, ultimately, militarily? Yeah, but is that where we're headed? Is that where Americans want to go? Is that what this situation calls for? That's a whole different set of questions, and I doubt the answers are very affirmative. But I think that basically sanctions are not going to produce capitulation, and I think that's part of the calculation here. And I think when you have a country ready to negotiate, and they step up and say, we're prepared to do this, and we have partners in the deal, if those partners perceive that we're not prepared to do it, then they will go off and do what they need to do, and you lose this unanimity, this cohesion that we have today and cooperation we have, which is part of what makes the application of these sanctions so powerful. We don't want to lose that. In addition, you asked, you know, what is Iran getting? What Iran is getting is a road map to the way they can get rid of the sanctions, that they ultimately, hopefully, can even strike a new relationship. Now, what does that require? It obviously requires things beyond just the nuclear program. It will require dealing with missiles, ballistic missiles, with terrorism, their support for it, with other kinds of activities. But you've got to begin somewhere. And the most immediate threat to us and to our friends in the region is the nuclear program, and that's where we've begun.
Mr. Mo Brooks of Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for sharing your time with us on a very important and very high-risk issue. In 2005, the President of Iran stated, quote, "Israel must be wiped off the page of time," end quote. In 2006, the President of Iran said, quote, "Whether you like it or not, the Zionist regime," referring to Israel, "is on the road to being eliminated," end quote. Also in 2006, the Iranian President added that, quote, "The Zionist regime is a rotten, dried tree that will be eliminated by one storm," end quote. I emphasize that a nuclear attack on Israel certainly qualifies as being, quote, "eliminated by one storm," end quote. The Jewish community, the United States, and for that matter, almost all the rest of the world disregarded Adolf Hitler's threats and were deceived by Hitler's promises in the 1930s, resulting in the Holocaust and murder of millions of innocent Jews. Inasmuch as Israel appears to be Iran's #1 target, I give great weight to Israel's opinion about the Iran nuke deal that you advocate. So far, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not been favorably impressed, having said, quote, "What was achieved in Geneva is not an historic agreement, it is an historic mistake," end quote. Quote, "To a large degree, this agreement rescues Iran from the pressure it has been under and also gives it international legitimacy to continue its nuclear program. This is a bad agreement," end quote. It seems to me, Mr. Secretary, that the key to any agreement is whether the United States can and will enforce it. In that vein, Mr. Secretary, on April 12, 2013, the Chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Buck McKeon, and the Chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Rogers, sent President Obama and you a letter that states, in part, quote, "Since October, we have written to you twice with our concerns about a massive Russian violation and circumvention of an arms control obligation to the United States of great significance to this nation and to its NATO allies," end quote. Given the Obama administration's failure to enforce arms control agreements with Russia, what can you say to Israel and the rest of our allies in the Middle East to convince them that America is still a reliable ally, that America will enforce agreements with Iran or else, and that America is not ignoring history and repeating the 1930s Neville Chamberlain-like pattern of appeasement and retreat that helped trigger World War II and the deaths of tens of millions of people around the world?
Well, let me begin, Congressman, by first of all condemning in the strongest language possible those expressions of hate and of sheer and utter insanity almost, asking for a country to be wiped off the face of the map and of time and for people to be so. That language is the most abhorrent kind of language you can find in any discourse in public life. It has no place in a reasonable world. It's unacceptable, and we should never hear that kind of language again. Secondly, with respect to Prime Minister Netanyahu and, quote, his attitude about this, I've had many conversations with the Prime Minister. He's a friend of mine. We talk frequently, and I respect his leadership, but I think he and I are working very, very effectively together on a lot of things. He knows, and I think Israel knows, that nothing will come between our relationship. Our security relationship, our commitment to Israel is ironclad. And we just may occasionally have a difference of tactics, but we have no difference strategically in what our goal is. Our goal is to make Israel safer, make the world and region safer, and we are committed to not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And this president, I will tell you unequivocally, without any question, demonstrably, measurably, has done more to provide for the security of Israel than any other administration in history.
Mr. Secretary, my time is running out. Let me conclude with one sentence.
I'm going to exercise the privilege of answering your question, Congressman. I'm not just going to sit here and have you
Mr. Chairman, may I have 5 to 10 seconds?
Excuse me. I think there's time for Mr. Brooks, both for you to ask a question and certainly for our Secretary of State to answer that question.
The President has made certain that Israel has Iron Dome. Israel has the V-22 Osprey. No other nation in the world has it. Israel has weaponry no other nation has. We have an aid program, a day-to-day collaboration, day-to-day. Even this week, the National Security Advisor is here collaborating, talking with us about how we approach this question of dealing with Iran. So I will tell you that we take no backseat to any administration ever in our support and our friendship and commitment to the State of Israel. Now, that said, I think that the United States is engaged in many efforts in the region now that make clear our determination to be a friend and supportive. We are removing weapons of mass destruction from Syria. We're engaged in major discussions with the Saudis, Emiratis, and others about Syria, about other issues. And I think those countries understand that when the President says Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, and he actually develops the military capacity to guarantee that, which no other president did, they can trust that the President means what he says.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In April of 2009, President Obama said in Prague, quote, "Rules must be binding, violations must be punished, words must mean something," end quote. If there's anything I can do to assist you in that regard with respect to these agreements, please let me know.
Absolutely, and I will tell you that we are focused on those and we take them seriously.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Secretary. I understand you have to go, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the members, but I think the Department's going to be available to answer all the members' written questions, and the Secretary of State will certainly be involved in that process in the days and weeks ahead. We again thank all of the members for attending this hearing today, and Mr. Secretary, we thank you.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, we didn't have time to do this earlier, but I would like to just put something on the record, because I keep hearing this and I don't think it adequately reflects the record. The FBI is currently conducting investigation and working through the law to try to apprehend identifiable people with respect to what happened in Benghazi. But it is absolutely inaccurate to suggest that nobody paid a price in the State Department for what happened. A report was delivered to me. I have acted on that report, as I said I would. 2 people were demoted and retired, 2 retired, 2 careers were ended over it, and they left the department. And 2 other careers have seen demotions as a consequence of what happened there. So I think it is simply inaccurate, and I hope we will stop repeating something as a mythology that has no basis in fact. There was accountability, there is accountability, and we need to go forward from that, frankly.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. As you know, we have made requests for a lot of data, some of which we got and a lot we did not. And so we look forward to continuing to work with you to have the questions that were asked by members of Congress answered by the Department of State, and receiving the information that we have requested. We thank you again for your testimony here today. We thank the members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We stand adjourned.